Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about ethical research and human subject research protections. So there's a long to-do list for this session. So please make sure you're reading your book chapter, any additional readings that are posted, you're completing your human subjects training, and then uploading a copy of their certificate to Blackboard in the assignment portal. Within this presentation, there's also embedded a video on the history of human subjects training. You'll be asked to complete a questionnaire on exempt, expedited, and full review, and that'll make more sense when we get to that portion. And then you'll be asked to write a draft of a consent form. So here are your learning objectives, and I'm going to let you go ahead and review those on your own. Our topic for this presentation is ethical research and human subject protections. But before we can really talk about this important aspect of, or any aspect of ethical research, we really need to look back on history and unethical research practices, which really led to the formation of important protections for human subjects. I'm not going to go into this at length because your NIH training will review this information. While sadly there are many cases of unethical research practices in our past, the World War II Nazi medical war crimes are some of the most egregious. The Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II led to the development of the Nuremberg Code, which is a set of guidelines providing protections to human subjects. I've posted a copy of the Nuremberg Code in this week's folder, and I recommend that you read through it. Here in the U.S., the syphilis study at Tuskegee was conducted with a group of 600 African American males, close to 400 of which had syphilis and roughly 200 who did not. The patients did not provide informed consent. Instead, the men were told they were being treated for bad blood. The study lasted over 40 years, though the study was originally designed to last only 6 months. Not only were the men not told they were going to be part of a study, they were actually not given adequate medical care, even after it became known that syphilis could be treated with penicillin. Within the study, 2 times as many men who had syphilis died than those without syphilis, and yet the study was not stopped. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the men, and they did win a multi-million-dollar settlement. In addition, the men were given, and their family members were given, lifetime medical benefits for themselves and their family members. But this is hardly repayment for what happened to them in the study. So click on the video icon to watch a video from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services on the evolving concern for human protection. The video, as I mentioned earlier, is old, but it does provide good background information. So, what are the responsibilities of the researcher? Well, the researcher carries the responsibility of protecting human subjects during a study. They must conduct research with honesty and integrity, and they must be honest with participants about the risks for participating, and be honest in analyzing the results and determining if the study should continue. All of which did not happen in the Tuskegee syphilis study, which I mentioned on the previous screen. In addition, research must be conducted that is meaningful, and research should be needed. We shouldn't or don't conduct frivolous or unneeded research. First and foremost, as a researcher, you must protect the study population at all phases of the research. Being a responsible researcher is easier when you follow sound research practices in all phases of the study development, implementation, evaluation, and dissemination. There are 3 guiding principles in the protection of human rights. The first principle is autonomy. Subjects must be given the opportunity to make their own decisions to participate, and those with diminished autonomy, for example, children or those with a diminished mental capability, must be given special protections. The second principle is beneficence. This means that the researcher or the study will do no harm, and consideration must be given to the risk a patient may experience. And this is often described as maximizing benefits while minimizing risks. Researchers have the burden to maximize the benefit that a participant will receive while minimizing the risk. The third guiding principle is justice. The research must be fair and unbiased in all phases of the research process. The burdens and benefits of the participants must also be fair and equitable in distribution. So one arm of a study can't receive a potential cure while another arm of the study is allowed to die. Control groups need to be well thought out, and the use of a control group can present an ethical dilemma, particularly since a control group means that someone isn't receiving a potential cure. They are not involved in the intervention phase of the study. So when is a control group warranted? Well, it may be warranted when there's no currently known and approved treatment, or when not enough is known about a current treatment. It may also be warranted when there's minimal risk to the participants. For example, a study to see the difference in reading skills for students exposed to and not exposed to TV. It's minimal risk to them, so a control group could be warranted in that case. It's very important that assignment to a control group is random. This randomization helps eliminate potential research bias. And at the end of a study, those assigned to the control group should be offered the treatment or the intervention so that they too may prevail of the potential benefits as well. So later in the semester, I'm going to talk more about the Institutional Review Board and specifically the IRB at the University of St. Joseph's and how you may submit to the IRB. So I'm just going to provide a little backdrop of the Institutional Review Board process here. So most universities and institutions, so an institution might be a hospital, have an Institutional Review Board. This board is charged with the responsibility of reviewing research proposals to ensure the rights of human subjects. While institutions may establish their own guidelines and procedures for this review process, they must, at minimum, be in compliance with federal and state policies. Research can be submitted to IRBs in several different ways. A proposal may be considered exempt if it does not deal with sensitive topics and individuals can't be identified. So the information is de-identified and you would never know who is providing a response or who's involved in it. An expedited proposal or expedited review would involve minimal risk and non-invasive procedures. For example, a simple written test or a memory test. But here, you might know who provides the answers to that information. A full review is needed when the study includes high-risk populations or invasive procedures. For example, if the study includes very young children or there are blood draws for lab results in it, that would be considered an invasive procedure. So let's take a break here. And for this activity, I want you to complete the exempt, expedited, or full review questionnaire or handout that's located in the content folder for this topic. I've also posted the answers, but really try to go through the questions first before you take a peek at the answers. Note that there aren't always easy answers to the questions, and in some cases, depending how your answer is explained, it could support two possible approaches. Towards the end of the semester, as I mentioned before, I'm going to talk more about the IRB process and what's involved in submitting a proposal. So, what elements are needed in an informed consent? So there are many elements that are needed. And remember that the number one responsibility of a researcher is to protect the rights of human subjects. Also remember that the first guiding principle of human rights protection is autonomy. So subjects must be given the opportunity to make their own decisions to participate. Therefore, an informed consent must be given to participants, and they must have the opportunity to make their own decision without pressure. So an informed consent needs many elements. Some are considered information elements and some are considered consent elements. So I'm first going to cover the information elements. So information elements are what will happen within the study and what are the rights of the individual. For example, it's a participant's right to leave the study at any time for any reason without penalty. And that should be clearly explained within the consent form. An informed consent should review the purpose of the study and what procedures will take place. And note that this information needs to be in lay terms that would be understandable by the target population. So no super scientific terms in there. The average person needs to be able to understand it. Additional information that should be included as information elements would be inclusion criteria, and these are factors that makes a potential participant eligible to participate. Also included should be risks and benefits for the participant, and they must be clear and understandable. So think about the medical commercials we see on television and the small print that includes the risks. Well, in an informed consent, these risks must be upfront and not hidden. Confidentiality is also an important element of the consent form. Participants must know how their information will be kept confidential. Details Another information element that's very important is plain language. The average reading level of the U.S. population is only the 7th to 8th grade. Therefore, any informed consent must be written in plain language and must be understandable to the target population. Plain language means you're writing for your audience so that they can easily interpret your meaning the first time. For more information about the use of plain language, click the pencil icon on this page and you'll be directed to a page that has more information on it. Another key component of the consent form is including information so that participants may reach out to you and contact you with questions. So this means that you need to include your name, your phone number, and your email address. And ideally, you're including information for at least 2 researchers on the consent form. So we've been talking primarily about information elements. So now let's talk about consent elements. And one consent element is making sure that participants understand that the study or their participation in the study is completely voluntary. They must understand that they can leave the study at any time for any reason, and if compensation is offered, participants must receive the compensation whether they finish the study or not. When dealing with vulnerable populations, extra protections are needed. If a subject is not able to give informed consent, then consent must be provided by a legal guardian or advocate. While children are often involved in research, consent for their involvement must be provided by parents or guardians. In addition, children must give their own permission to participate if they are of an age where they can understand what's involved. For example, in my work with adolescents in Springfield, the participants had to provide what we call an assent form, and this means that they, as adolescents, were willing to participate in the study. In addition to this, they had to get the consent form signed by their parents or guardians. Special care must also be taken when working with prisoners in research studies. They're considered a vulnerable population because their incarceration makes it difficult to voluntarily give consent. Prisoners are vulnerable to coercion by the nature of their incarceration, and this makes it difficult for them to voluntarily offer their consent. A written informed consent should be developed based on the information elements and the consent elements that we just spoke about. All participants should receive a copy of the informed consent before the study begins, and in special occasions or special circumstances, it may be possible for a participant to give oral consent, but your institutional review board would have to approve that process. The next 3 pages provide an example of an informed consent form. So take a couple minutes and see if you can pick out all of the required elements, so the information and consent elements. Also note that there's an IRB stamp at the bottom of the page, so you'll see it at the bottom left-hand corner of the consent form. And so in many instances, in order for a consent form to be given to a participant, it actually needs to have the IRB stamp on it. This is an example of an assent form. Can you see the difference between this and the consent form? Do a comparison. For this activity, write a draft of a consent form. There are many examples online, and a good way to start is to think about the type of research you will conduct and then type that information into your browser. So for example, if I am going to conduct a study that's going to include a survey, I might type in sample informed consent for a survey. So take a couple minutes and think about what your consent form would look like. So this is where this presentation will end. Be sure to read the chapters and complete any assignments and activities due this week. If you have any questions about anything, be sure to reach out and contact me as soon as possible. Thanks so much. Talk to you next time.